you're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm asking, what are some things, or what is one thing that you want to see appear in your life? What do you want to see appear? What is not there that you would like to have show up in your life to feel more satisfied, more content? And how do you attain it? And you can see that I didn't say anything, and you can hear that I didn't say anything about happiness. Happiness, it can be somewhat elusive, and it's hard to define. So I like to talk about satisfied and content when talking about this type of subject matter, because I think that there's something missing, and a lot of people feel that way, something missing in their life, something missing in all of our lives, and being able to pinpoint that and figuring out what that is, and more than that, how do you attain it? But I find that it's actually more challenging sometimes to figure out exactly what it is. And that can be a challenging part to be in, because it can be the roadblock that challenges you from obtaining it. Because you seriously might not know exactly what is missing. You may be blocking it out. You may be trying to ignore it, dismiss it. It might be a lifetime of missing something that you've wanted, and you have deferred, deflected, overlooked it in the opinion of not wanting to see the reality because you didn't want to deal with the situation. And so many people are in that situation where there's something missing from your life. And if you know it, you're actually past half the battle at this point. You're in a lot better spot than many people because you actually know what's missing. But that can also be a catch-22 as well. Knowing what's missing and not knowing or how to attain it can be very challenging. And it can feel very overwhelming, especially if you've been trying to work through this for a long time. You may feel very stagnant or overwhelmed. You may feel underwhelmed. You may just not know what the next step is. And in that process of not knowing what the next step is, you may feel stressed out or sad in a situation where you just don't know how to get what you want, how to move forward. And so, we're coming into an interesting time of the year, and all times of the year are very interesting, right? But we're coming into an interesting time of the year, and so many of us are dealing with those feelings. Many people's feelings it's right there. It's right on the sleeve. We're showing our heart. We're going through the processes. We're dealing with changes, ups and downs, and conflicts. You're dealing with stress or anxiety. Maybe you're dealing with feeling numb. Maybe you've gotten to the point where you've numbed yourself because you don't know how to deal with the situation. Perhaps you're just upset or overwhelmed at work. Maybe your career is not where you want it to be. You're not getting things from the work that you do. You feel like you're not getting anything in the exchange, for the labor that you're doing, for the work and the time-consuming, job that you're working. Maybe it's family dynamic. Maybe the family is there, but it's not really showing up in the family way that you'd like it to. Maybe it's not exactly how you want it to be. Maybe there's lots of issues. Maybe you're dealing with issues with your children, dealing with issues with your spouse. Maybe some of the issues at home and the family dynamic is extremely challenging, and you're overwhelmed about all the challenges that you're going through, and you want things to just get peaceful or more at ease with you. And so in that situation, that can be something that's very important to look at as well. And so in all these situations, we're taking into consideration, whether it's our home, whether it's our family, whether our career, perhaps it's our friendships, perhaps it's the excitement level in our life, and many of us are not having that excitement that we want. We're not having that connection. And so if you're going through that, you may be looking for other ways or means to create excitement or to be more interested in your day-to-day life. And being more interested in your day-to-day life can be very fulfilling, but we got to find that excitement in a safe place. We got to find that excitement in something that's not going to be a roller coaster. Find that excitement somewhere that's going to be pleasant and a pleasant experience. If it's a family dynamic, maybe you're having issues with the family. Maybe you've always wanted to have a close family. You've always wanted to be close with your family. Whether that's your parents, your brothers and sisters, maybe, your immediate family, or, that could be also a situation where you feel like you're not having that connection that you want. You would prefer to have a connection and you're not having that connection that you want. And so being able to see that and that connection that you want and understanding that connection is very valuable. And seeing what's missing. Is there something missing in that connection? Do you feel like you're not able to be yourself? Do you feel like you're not able to be the person that you are? Do you feel like you're not able to show your truth? On the other hand, do you feel like you have shown your truth and it's being taken advantage of? or, family members are kind of running all over you, or they're using the truth that you've told them in a negative way or in a controlling way, or as forever ammunition against you. All these things play a part. Maybe you don't feel like you have an outlet. Maybe you don't feel like you have a quality outlet of friends to be able to communicate with. Maybe you don't feel like you have an outlet outside of work, things that you can do that's not work related. And you feel like all you do is you go, you deal with the family, you leave the house, you go straight to work, you're at work all the time, you come back, you're doing the family, you go to bed, you get up, you do work again. You could be feeling that way. It could be this like endless cycle that you feel like you have no outlet. And when we feel like we have no outlet, we don't feel like we have a way of expressing ourselves outside of this pattern and cycle that we've created. It can feel maybe a little excruciating. It might get very tiring, actually, physically, emotionally, and mentally, and that's something to really think about as well. So if something's nagging you, and oftentimes when we are not satisfied or content in our life, things trigger us. Things can trigger us. And what are those triggers? When we think about triggers in the situation, we may be triggered by what other people are doing. We may be triggered about what other people have in their lives versus what we have in our lives. We could be triggered in many ways. We could be triggered by somebody else's family dynamic. You could be triggered by a picture on Instagram. If you're having family dynamic issues and you want everybody to get along and you're trying to connect the dots and you're wanting to have this close-knit family, you might see a picture on Instagram where you see this happy family sitting there and they're enjoying each other's company, for a morning coffee before work. You might just go over the edge with something like that. These things can really trigger us when we're dealing with something that's not satisfying or that's the opposite of contentment in our life. And some of you may have been dealing with these types of things for a long time. Some of you may have been dealing with these things for a short period of time. But what I do find out is eventually these things come to a head. Eventually we have to deal with it. And eventually, ultimately, we have to figure out what it is that we want and why is it triggering us so much. Because these triggers can be very, 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 very alarming at first because you don't know why am I getting angry about this, or why am I getting concerned about this, or why is this triggering me to feel this way, or why did I get so upset about XYZ. And these things are very important to understand, because the more we can understand that, the more we can take into consideration a lot of different things, understanding who we are, what we stand for, but more than that, understanding maybe what we haven't had in our life. Because I think that the longer you haven't had something in your life, it can go two ways, right? If you've ever experienced something that you want and then you didn't get it anymore, you might long for something, right? You might long for something or feel like there's something missing. Now, if you never had it, would you know that it's missing? Possibly not. Actually, probably not. If you've never had something before, how would you know that it's missing? If I've never had ice cream before, how would I know, whether or not I don't personally eat ice cream, but there was a time in my life that I did. But let's just say that I never had ice cream. I wouldn't know that I was missing anything if I really liked ice cream because I'd had it before. I wouldn't know. If I've never had it, it's not a big deal. But I think that sometimes if you've tasted something or had something or done something and you've experienced something and then later on down the road you're not, that can also create a longing. It can also create a trigger point. But also sometimes you might not have had something. You might have seen something or been around something and kind of been around it, the proximity of it. Maybe you've been around the proximity of a really amazing family where everybody seems to get along and your family doesn't. And so you see that kind of camaraderie and that type of interaction, and you see how great they are and the patting on the backs and how everybody cares. And that could be very triggering. Maybe because more often than not, it's not about that you had it before. It's about that you know that there's an option for a different option. So now by seeing that, you realize that you could have had a different opportunity growing up, a different type of family dynamic, or even have a different family dynamic now. When I work with many clients, when they're going through marital issues or marital problems, when they talk to somebody that's having what they consider the best marriage, or they see pictures of people very happy or people on trips or people, that can be very triggering too, because they feel like they're missing out on something. They feel like that person has something that they want to have. And so these things can be very triggering. And so I guess what I'm asking you to look at, honestly, is really, inspect those things that we consider triggers. Inspect those things when you have thoughts of anger or resentment or sadness because of seeing something or reading something or a conversation with a friend, catching those things to realize those are truly the triggers. Those are truly the triggering things here that we need to be super aware of to really understand our situation. Super triggering things to really understand our situation. And that can be very powerful. And writing those things down can be very powerful too, and understanding what triggered us and why. Because all of these things go back to maybe things that we want or things that we wish that we had, things that would make us more satisfied or content. Maybe a friend of yours just got a recent promotion on a job that she's been wanting or he's been wanting, and they're so happy and ecstatic, and they're talking about how great their boss is and how their boss really listens to them and how they have all these things going on. That can be really challenging to listen to, very triggering if you've had the opposite experience and hoping to have an experience like that. You love to be there for your friend, and you want to be there on all levels for your friend, but at the same time, it may feel a little sad. You may be triggered to feel sad because this person has something that maybe you would like to have. And so really kind of looking and going introspectively in these trigger points can be especially enlightening, and it can help enlighten the situation and basically shine light into what we need to see, what the space is that we feel like we're missing something at. And so looking at that home life, the career, the family, the friends, the outlet. The outlet's a big time thing too, because, a lot of times we can get stuck in the rut, of getting stuck in things and feeling, just overwhelmed, because that can be painful, feeling overwhelmed. And that's where we need to be at. We need to figure out, what is it that's nagging me? What is irritating me? What irritates me when I see other people doing things? What are the things that really irritate me or upset me? Those are the things that we need to analyze. Those are the trigger points that we need to see. And that is what's going to be so valuable, being able to excavate these situations. So I want us to think about that. What are the things that you need? What are some things that you're living with, in the situations you're living with, that you're not getting some of your needs met? And, being able to have some self-discovery on this and understand this can be very powerful, because we're going to have to understand exactly what it is before we can bring it up to somebody else and let them know how we're feeling. So definitely being able to have that information privy, being able to have that right there for ourselves so that we can actually look at that and dig deep into these triggers to really get some life information and really understand where we are and how we got there. And this is a very valuable situation. So if somebody's triggering you at work, how does that look? If your spouse is triggering you, if your children are triggering you, if your friends are triggering you, if a commercial on TV is triggering you, understanding where that's coming from and why is that triggering. Because we're not going to get upset or triggered by something that's not upsetting us or is not creating some sort of havoc in our life. And we need to understand that, because the more we understand that, the better we understand where all this is coming from. And it can be very informative and helpful. And this is our first step. So stay tuned. I'm going to give you more information on how to find this and how to deal with it, so we can begin to find that satisfaction that we want in our life, to feel better about every area in our life. Stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm asking you, what is something that's missing in your life? What do you want to see in your life? What is something that you want in your life, or you think you want in your life, that's going to make you more satisfied or more content? And how do you get that? That's the question. It's like, is it about the family dynamic? Is it something that you're wanting? Is it that you want to have children? Is it that you want to have a more solid connection with your family? Do you want to have a connection with your mother and father that you don't have? What about your spouse? Do you want to get married? Are you currently married? Are you married but you're in the roommate situation and you want to change that or rectify that? Are you feeling like you're not getting a lot of excitement in your life? Do you feel like you're kind of stuck in a rut? What about the career? Does your career seem that it's going on the right trajectory? Do you feel overwhelmed about it? Does it create stress? Does it create uncertainty? What about the friends? Do you have friends in your life that you really can connect with, that you feel like are instrumentally there in your life and that can be there for you? Or do you feel like you don't? Do you feel like an outsider? Do you want other friends? Do you want close friends? These are questions to ask. What about an outlet? Do you have an outlet in your life that you can look at? Do you have an outlet in your life that gives you an ability to get out of the humdrum and do some things that you want to do? And if you don't have an outlet, you might be feeling overwhelmed. You might be working all the time, constantly working or taking care of the family and feeling, though, that that's all you have going on. And these are things that we really, really need to look at. These are things that we really need to expand upon, and then also understand our triggers around it. And right before the break, I was talking about those triggers and how to understand those triggers and what triggers really are, because many of us have triggers and we don't even realize we have them. We don't even realize what it is. We might get angry about something, and instead of realizing, wow, why did I get so angry about that? Or why did that upset me so much? No, we don't think about it. We just sweep it under the rug. We keep on going. Many of us have things in our life that maybe you had at one time that you don't have anymore. And so you have this longing for something that you had a long time ago that you don't have anymore. And so you're always wondering what life would be like with X, Y, Z. Some of you may never have had it before. Maybe there's something that's been missing in your life, but you can't pinpoint it because you didn't have it before and you don't remember, or you don't have an idea what it is. And so you cannot pinpoint it. You can't think about it. It's just one of those things you can't think about, or you don't want to think about it. Some of us sweep things under the rug all the time, and we have to analyze that. What are we sweeping under the rug, and why are we sweeping this under the rug? Why is that? What is the purpose of sweeping something under the rug that actually matters so much to us? And many of us realize, right, that it's self-preservation. If I actually look at or define what is missing in my life, I might go bonkers. Some of you might say, hey, if I really address what's missing in my life or the things that need to be changed in my life, I might get super overwhelmed and I don't want to deal with it. Maybe you realize that in order to address these things, you need to make changes in your life that you're just not willing to make at this point. And those changes are very important. We have to make those changes. We have to allow those changes to come. But I'm not here harping on that right now. I'm not sitting there telling you have to do this or that. I'm just saying that if we eventually want to make changes, we're going to have to do some actions. We're going to have to make some actionables. We're going to have to be accountable and do things. But that can be a very scary place too, because many of you might be in a place where you do want these changes. You do want to make changes. You do want these incremental changes. But quite honestly, you don't want to deal with the outcome or the aftermath or the backlash that this could bring into your life. And these are the things that we got to think about. These are the things that we have to analyze. These are the things that we have to see its truth. And many of us are in different places in our life, whether you've analyzed what's missing, whether you haven't analyzed what's missing, whether you want to know, whether you don't want to know. Whether you do know, but you haven't moved forward in dealing with it. Maybe you do know and you've been moving forward slowly in incremental changes, but you're not willing to pull the trigger at this moment on things that need to be done. Maybe you're in the process of making changes and you've done that. You've pulled the triggers and now you're really worried about the triggers that have been pulled. And all those things are very important for us to analyze. So stay tuned. We're going to be talking about this. We're going to be talking about ways to see it and things that we can do to begin to move forward to make our life better, more successful, and more content. So I got some upcoming stuff coming up, so don't change the channel. Live your true life perspectives. We'll be back, but think about it. What is the thing that's missing in your life? What do you want to see changed? What is it that needs to be augmented? Live your true life perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm asking you the question, what is something that's missing in your life? What do you want to see in your life? Is it something missing or something that needs tweaked in your life to be more satisfied and more content? And how do we do that? How do we attain that? How do we find that? How do we figure out that information, that knowledge is power, and how do we move forward in our life with that information? going forward in a positive way. Well, I was talking about triggers and how people can trigger us, situations can trigger us, and that can be very triggering, no pun intended, but it can be very triggering. But at the same point, our triggers are our knowledge. When we're being triggered by something, it's triggering us to realize that there's something underlying, there's an issue, there's a problem, there's a fear, there's something there that we need to figure out, that we need to get to the bottom of. And if we do, we'll be able to understand a lot more about ourselves because, quite honestly, you're not triggered by something that's not emotionally triggering to you. If you're not emotionally pushed in a certain direction, if you're not emotionally dealing with something in that situation, it's not going to trigger you in the same way. And so we need to be aware of that. We need to understand that. And we need to not be triggered, but yet we actually do need the triggering because in the process of being triggered, we learn more about ourselves. And that's what's so powerful here. We learn more about ourselves, but the triggering itself is one thing. So let's say you get triggered about something like I was talking about earlier in the show, during the radio show here, about being triggered. We could be triggered by a commercial on TV. You could see, I've had clients, especially during certain times of the year where there's this commercial and the family's all hanging out and they're having this great, bonding and they're all eating together. And I've had clients, get really upset about that because they wish that they had a tighter family. They wish they had a family where they could all eat together. They wish they had something like that where they could all be together and have that experience. And it triggers them to remind them of what they don't have. It triggers them to remind them of the family they don't have. Maybe you're looking at Instagram and you see a picture of somebody getting engaged and it really triggers you, or somebody getting married and it really triggers you, and you just can't deal with it. You don't know how to process it. It's overwhelming. It's stressful. Well, maybe you want to be married, or maybe you're upset with your marriage. Maybe you're not happy with the situation you're in right now. But we have to dig deep, and that's what we have to do, is dig deep into these triggers and understanding these triggers. So if, for example, you're unhappy about something, getting deeper into it. Why am I? Let's say that you're unhappy with your job, for example. Let's say that you're just kind of just over it. You get in there, you're not really happy, you don't have any energy when you're there. You have to ask yourself, what's happening in this job that's creating this feeling for me? Why do I feel this way? Why am I feeling kind of disheartened or dissatisfied or underwhelmed? You have to ask yourself, is it the job itself? Is it what you're doing? Is it the boss? Is it the people you work with? Is it the timeline? Is it the time you have to be there? Is it where you have to be at? Is it the commute? Is it not the commute? Is it something you like to do? Is it something you love to do? Is it something you hate to do? Look at all those things, because it doesn't necessarily need to be everything. It could just be a couple of pieces here and there that could be tweaked. Or it could be the entire direction of the direction you're going, or it could be the organization that you're working with. But again, we have to get deep on these triggers. We can't just see the trigger and just get angry about it. We have to dig deep and uncover what is not satisfying. What can I do? What would I need to do to change or get rid of or eliminate in order to feel better about myself, my situation, that sort of thing? And, this goes for every little part of your life. Every big part, every little part of your life is, where can we make these tweaks to be happier? Where can we make these tweaks to be happier with our life? And these tweaks are super important, and they're definitely for us to understand, because this helps us to create our reality that we want. This helps us to create the reality we want. It helps us to take these steps toward where we want to be. And it also allows us to see what's missing. Some of us don't want to see what's missing, but eventually it's going to come back to hurt us. Eventually it's going to come back to hurt us. It's about, because we're going to be upset at some point. There's going to be resentment at some point. And, that is something that we have to look at. The resentment at some point is going to be a problem. And we have to see that for what it is, and that's where I feel like the faster, the quicker we can understand our triggers, the faster, the quicker that we can assimilate this information, the better. And then what do we do about it? So let's say that we've looked into these triggers, and I'm sure you have. You've looked into these triggers and you've thought about it. What's the next step that you can take to make things better? What's the next step that you can take to augment the situation? What do you have to do? What do you have the ability to do in your own hands with your own ability? What can you do? I really advise at this point, really looking at this to analyze, okay, if it's a family dynamic and I don't feel close to my family, can I have those conversations? Can I start opening the lines of communication and having communication and opening communication to be able to communicate my feelings? Can I do that? Do I feel confident in doing that? Do I feel comfortable in doing that? How comfortable do I feel in doing this? Have I already done it before? Have I done it multiple times? And many of you may say, hey, Ashley, this isn't my first time to do this. I've been trying to figure this out for a while. I've been going through these changes and these issues in my life, and I'm doing the best I can. I brought it up to my family. I have this family issue. I brought it up multiple times. I don't know how to keep bringing it up. And if that's the case, that's great that you've been pushing yourself to do this. Not great that people are not seeming to see the situation or help the situation. However, the fact that you've been putting it out there. And so if you've been putting it out there, kudos for you, by the way, because that's a lot to do, because it really is. It can be very uncomfortable and maybe stressful, but definitely you're doing the right thing. However, how do we get the pendulum to move? How do we get change to happen? And I think, everybody that's involved that you need to, really looking at the triggers, looking at the situation, is there some conversations that can be had? Who are those conversations with? If there are conversations that can be had, who do we have those with? How do we start the line of communication? How do we open the line of communication? If there's an issue with one of your kiddos, how do you begin to have that conversation? If there's an issue with a parent where you've always wanted a closer relationship, how do you begin to open that conversation? How do you let go of the resentment from the past? How do we move forward with a new type of relationship that works for everybody? How do we create that? How do we voice what we want? If you're in a marriage where you feel like it's become the roommate situation, how do you bring that up? How do you have that conversation? How often have you tried to have that conversation? I know that many of you say, hey, I've tried to have this more often than not. I'm starting to get over it. I'm starting to get stressed out about it. I can't seem to have this conversation enough. I've brought it up multiple times. Nothing's changing. And if that's the case, and you brought it up multiple times and nothing's changing, what do we do next? What's the next choice? What's the next solution? What do we do next? What's the next actionable? Sometimes you have to get really real. You got to think about how far you're going to go and how important it is to go that far. And are you willing to do that? And I think that many of us might not want to do that because of the fear factor. Fear is very real. Even though you might not be happy with something, how do you deal with it? How do you overcome the fear of letting something go? How do you overcome the fear of dealing with a situation? How do you overcome the fear and speak your truth? How do you overcome the fear and do what you need to do? How do you move forward in your life understanding that and do what you need to do? And so many of you might be coming into this time of year and, you're thinking about all those things. And the last few years have been very interesting with all the dynamics. Some people have really grown closer together. Some people have grown farther apart. How do you deal with that? How do you merge that? How do you understand that? And then how do you make these things work for you? Like, how do you have these conversations where you can actually conversate and communicate without causing static and anger? How do we move forward with doing that properly? How do we do this kind of stuff? And then, what do we do next? And, think about it. The triggers. Analyze those triggers. Start asking your questions. If you're triggered by someone else's marriage, why is that triggering you? Is it because it seems like they're closer? Is it because they seem like they communicate more? Is it because you feel like they have a real marriage and not a roommate situation? What really is triggering you there? If it's the family dynamic, is it their connection? Is it their honesty? Is it their ability to be honest with one another, but not to be used against you? You might be in a situation where you want to be honest with your family, you want to be honest with your friends or what have you, but you can't because every time you have done that in the past, it's been used against you, it's been held against you, and that's something that you don't want to deal with again, and definitely nobody wants to deal with that. So how do you move forward with that? And these are the questions you have to ask, and these are the conversations that you have to be willing to have. And some of these conversations can be super painful. Some of these conversations can be super scary, but again, is it scarier to have the conversation or is it scarier to hold it all in? I don't know if it's scarier to hold it all in, but isn't it just kind of overwhelming and choking to hold it in where you can't have that conversation? And you have to think about it. Don't you owe yourself the ability to communicate your feelings? Don't you owe yourself the ability to say what you want to say? Don't you owe yourself the option of being honest and direct for the fact that you need to make changes in your life? And honestly, if you're not happy, the other person's probably not happy either. And that's the caveat here, is that when someone else is not happy, usually what happens is that the other person's not happy as well. Maybe it might not be the exact same things, but it's definitely about something. So I want you to analyze that too. So if we're not saying how we feel about something, the other person might be holding back too, because everybody's in fear of speaking their truth or hurting each other or hurting other people. And that is something to understand. So think about that. Now, when it comes to your job, you might not want to jump right up to your boss and tell them all the problems in the work environment, but you might want to be proactive. How do we proactively connect with the people at work? How do we proactively make changes where things begin to work out? How do we proactively move forward in things that we need to move forward? And those are analyzations that we have to think about. How can we kind of, say how we feel in a very easygoing way, but still authoritative, but yet being able to make those changes. And first off, being able to go exactly to the place of where those changes need to be made. Not just like an overarching issue, but those changes and understanding exactly how those changes need to be made and what we can do to make those changes ourselves. And that's something we also have to think about too. And we have to be kind of delicate in certain situations. And I think in any situation, honestly, we have to be delicate to a certain degree, whether we're talking to our mom, our dad, our spouse, significant other, our children, our boss, our coworkers, whoever it is that we're talking to and discussing with. We have to be a certain way and showing up the way that we should be showing up as, showing up how we should show up, being there, being true to ourselves, putting ourselves out there, but also allowing ourselves to be, honest, allowing ourselves to show our feelings. And that's also scary too, because many of you may feel like you are not able to be honest about your feelings. Maybe you feel like your feelings are going to be used against you, and that's something that is very, very important to understand and something to really take into consideration. And that's definitely, where we need to be at. And that's where we need to think and focus at, and be able to analyze and understand that situation and see it for what it truly is. And that's very powerful. And I want you to think about that. So analyzing that and thinking about that, where that lies, how do we understand that? How do we understand exactly inherently what's triggering us and what we need to discuss? And so once we kind of know the situation, once we know what triggers us, we know who we need to probably discuss this with. And then it's about taking our own responsibility with the situation, and then also kind of showing them maybe part of their responsibility for the situation, but taking our responsibility for the situation at hand first, and then talking about the situation as it is. Because if we don't talk about it, how do we ever rectify it? And there might be people, situations, family dynamics, marriages, bosses that you can talk about it, but it's not going to get changed. And so then that's the next decision you have to make is, okay, if it hasn't been changed and we're not working on it and nobody's willing to make these changes, do I continue to do this? Or do I start making changes in my own life? Do I continue to go down this pathway, or do I need to make changes in my own life? And those are the questions that I want you to ask. Those are the things that I want you to think about. Because that's where we need to get to. Because if that's the case, then we got to get into a space of being not in fear to make those changes, to feel better about ourselves, to make those decisions, to move forward in our life, to be happy with those decisions that we made. And those are things that are very, very clear to us, very important to us. And then we start seeing, how do we overcome the fear factor that we have to make those changes? At what time do we need to begin to put actionables in there? And then what are those actionables? If a part of it is that your family is not helpful and that when you try to tell them how you feel, they use it against you, well, you probably can't tell them how you feel anymore to a certain degree. And you're going to have to pull back a little bit. And you're going to have to eliminate some of that. And you're going to have to get another outlet besides them, because they're not going to show up to the plate where you need them to be at. If you've already asked them multiple times, we realize that. If you're looking for your marriage to be something else and that other person doesn't want it, they're not willing to change it, they're not willing to make it that way, then you have to sit there and say, am I willing to continue to walk down this path, or do I need to make change in my life to be happier and healthier and to do what I need to do? And that's the question. But we have to know where everybody stands before we can understand exactly what we need to do. Stay tuned, because Live Your True Life Perspectives will be back in a few shakes, because right now I got to give you some tips and tricks when we return. So Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back, and we'll be back in 2 shakes.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I've been asking the question, what is missing in your life? What do you want to see in your life? What do you want to see in your life? What do you need to be more satisfied or more content, and how do you get it? How do you attain it? Where do we get this? And right before the break, I was talking about once we've asked the questions, after being triggered, and then honestly understanding what's really super triggering to us, and then understanding why it's triggering us, and then understanding the underlying reason of what's triggering us, so whether it's about family, career, home life, spouse, not having excitement in your life, friendships, outlet, whatever it looks like. What are you lacking? What needs to be taken care of? What is lacking? What needs to be fixed, augmented, or renewed? And all these questions are very pertinent, and we got to ask those questions. And I was talking about that right before the break. When you start asking people involved with some questions, and you start looking for answers, you got to get some answers so that you can eventually get some solution. Because if we're not ever in solution, and we're always kind of in a different place in our life, we're not getting that happiness and joy that we want. We're not getting that happiness and that joy that we want, that we really, really super need in our life. And so that's something that we really need to find. And so if it is an issue with the family dynamic and they are not supportive, we need to understand, and they're not willing to be supportive, and you brought it up multiple times, and you explained your situation, you've taken your responsibility, you've asked them if they can help with this, they don't want to do that, they're not interested in doing that, you're going to need to look somewhere else for your support system. You're going to need to go somewhere else for your support system, and you're going to need to stop climbing this tree to get support. This is very important information here. If you're in a marriage and you've brought it up to your spouse, things, you've taken your responsibility for things as well. It's not all about the other person. We've taken responsibility for the things that we've done, good, bad, and indifferent, and things that we haven't worked on and things that we have worked on. We take responsibility for our actions, for our situations, for our emotions, for our feelings. But if that person's not willing to change or make changes to your marriage, that you need help with the marriage, you need help from them to make changes, then what do we do next? How do we do this? How do we move forward? And if they're willing to, great. How do you work toward that? How do you work and and really focus on getting together and working on that? If they're not willing to work on that, what do you do next? How do you move forward with that? So if that person's not willing to make those changes, or they don't see that as an issue, or they don't want to sacrifice that or whatever, then what is your next step? How do you continue to grow? Because it might not be with them. You got to think about that, because if you continue to bark up this tree and nobody's willing to work with you, how much more barking are you willing to do before you become exhausted? And as you become more and more exhausted, what do you do next when you feel powerless? Because what you're wanting is not coming to you. And I'm saying we all have to make sacrifices in some areas. We all have to do it. But if you've been sacrificing, and nothing's changed, you've got to really analyze, is this really what I need? Or am I in this situation, whether I'm in this job, or I'm in this family, or I'm in this career, or I'm in this marriage, am I in this because of fear? Or am I in this because I love it? Am I in it because of fear of being abandoned? Am I in this because of fear of not having the money? Or am I in this for the fear of not having those friends that I want? Whatever it is whatever that fear is coming from, whatever that fear is resonating from, are you in it because of the fear and the worry? Or are you in it because you actually, at the core, love this situation, this job, this person, this union, whatever that looks like? And you got to answer that question. That has to be something that you have to answer, and something that you want to think about. And so think about it. And if we go directly toward the source and ask people questions that are directly affected or directly affecting us on this can help us to get what we need to understand where we stand, what they want to do, what they don't want to do, how to move forward, how to really rectify the situation, and how to ultimately get what we want, because that's what we want to do. We want to ultimately get what we want and make these changes. We might have to sacrifice some, but it allows us to become more satisfied and more content. And ultimately, you're going to become more satisfied and more content just by speaking your truth, but just by speaking about it talking about it, allowing it to be, allowing it to come to coming to you, and allowing you to connect with that, because that is so powerful. The more we know about ourselves, the more knowledge we have, the more powerful we are, the more sufficient we are, the more self-sufficient, the more satisfied, and the more content. So the actual working through this process is very cathartic. Even though it seems very scary, it's very cathartic and can be very helpful in many situations. It can be very helpful to you to get that you need to really move forward in our life and to really concentrate on that future that we have and really resonating with that future. And that's where we want to be. So I want you to really claim that. Claim it. Stake this. It's your life to live. This is your life to live. We need to make it the best. We need to live it to the fullest. Nobody's going to give you a Medal of Honor for not living the life you want. I've said that a million times. Nobody is going to give you a Medal of Honor for living a life that you don't want to live, for not living your truth, for not living your true life. So therefore, let's begin to figure that out and figure out what our true life is, what's missing by those triggers, and execute plan by following through and having those conversations even if we don't want to have those. Stay tuned for the show next. We'll have another show and Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.